We have already selected the rough design we're going to move forward with. We're now going to refine that rough design by doing a final line work pass. And from there, we're going to model the form using the lighting and form principles we've just covered. I'm going to be breaking this down into a step-by-step, layer-by-layer process in Photoshop. I find that this helps new artists focus on one principle at a time. But remember, this is going to take a lot of practice. It may take some time before you feel fully comfortable with this process. But keep practicing and you'll get better. So here we go. So here we have our thumbnail of choice, and we are ready to start on our final line drawing. You'll see that I am lowering the opacity of the rough concept layer and adding a new final line layer above it. This is so I can draw over the top of my loose drawing and still see my final lines. This is kind of like using tracing paper in traditional media. Just as a note, I will be adjusting the speed of the captured video throughout this module. I'm being very clean with my line work, and I'm making sure I'm using the line weight of the brush itself to create the sense of depth and form. For your final line drawing, I recommend using a hard brush that varies in line weight, as controlled by stylus pressure. This helps you control the variation in mark making more naturally. Here I'm thickening up the line weight around his beard. Notice how it helps pull the beard forward in space, off his chest, and makes it a more distinct and prominent shape. This once again allows us to control the drawing and to better communicate how the 3D forms of the character would sit in 3D space. And this is only with line work. As I'm doing this final line drawing pass, I'm using the rough sketch underneath as a guide. I must maintain a balance between preserving the energy, movement, and abstract shapes within the rough design, while also correcting and adjusting the anatomy and costume elements to be more naturalistic and functional. If you don't maintain this balance, your final drawing may suffer. If you rely too heavily on the rough drawing, your character may feel anatomically incorrect, or the perspective may feel inconsistent throughout the drawing. On the other hand, if you do not follow the rough drawing close enough, your drawing may end up feeling stiff or lifeless, or your design may change drastically, and you may end up with a character that looks completely different from your original intent. Even though I'm drawing on a 2D surface, I'm still thinking of the 3D forms I'm trying to communicate. I am making sure that his clothing wraps around his body in 3D space. I'm especially careful to make sure his belts and hand wraps and anything else that encircles his body has a proper ellipse, and that those elements are sitting in 3D space correctly. As you are doing your final line pass, if there is part of the design that you still need to explore, you can always make additional rough layers over top of your final line work. Once you have nailed down the final design, reduce the opacity and do a final line work version, just as we've done with our character thumbnail. Once again, as I get to the end of the line drawing, I always go back through and thicken up different areas of the line work. I'm trying to show the form and weight of the character as much as possible with my line work. So here we have our finished line work. Now let's put some values into this drawing. As you can see here, we have our rough layer with its opacity set very low at 10%, and our line work layer with our finished line drawing. Let's take a moment to create a base layer upon which we can stack our value layers and our color layers down the road. To do this, let's click on the line work layer. Then let's grab our Magic Wand tool, over here in our toolbox on the left. With the Magic Wand tool, let's click outside of the line drawing, as well as any gaps or holes in the design, so that we are selecting just the negative space around the character himself. Once the negative space is selected, go up to Select and Inverse. This has now inverted our selection so that only the positive space of the character is selected. Let's make sure that our selection is really tight around our line drawing. To do this, let's again go to Select, then Modify, and Contract. When the Contract Selection window pops up, put in a very small number of pixels. I usually do around 2, and then hit OK. This will bring in our selection just a bit, so that we don't get any rogue pixels outside of our line work. Next, let's grab the Paint Bucket tool, and then some kind of neutral color, like a 50% medium gray. I'm actually going to go for a little bit of a warmer, neutral gray this time around. Let's go ahead and fill our selection with the paint bucket. Let's rename this layer to Base, as this is going to be our base layer upon which all of our rendering and color layers will sit on top. So now we have our line work layer and our base layer independent from each other, with the base layer underneath.